Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You have reached the No Name Cinema Society. It is a rare Friday show, January 5th, 2018. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm excited to tell you that we are now starting our 46th set of episodes in which we're going to do a current feature, an indie spotlight, a classic movie discussion, and a sound off. We'll talk about more of that later. Ladies and gentlemen, hi, my name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm one of your hosts. And as you can see, those are your fans. I'm back in Astoria. Back and forth between LA and New York all the time. I'll be in LA by Monday, and then back to Astoria a week from tonight, and then back to LA by Martin Luther King Day and probably to stay. So as many of you know, we are reviewing The Post tonight, Steven Spielberg's latest film. It's our current feature for discussion. It is our third Steven Spielberg film that we've discussed on the show. We did Bridge of Spies in episode 18.1, Raiders of the Lost Ark in episode 28.3. This being the third film by Spielberg that we've discussed in the show, that would tie him with directors John Ford and David Lean, also who have had 3 films that we've discussed on the show. What they did not have, however, is a top 5, and we did do a top 5 Spielberg films in episode 18.4, which was part of our most successful sound-off, actually. So now that we've done that, let's give some intros here, and we'll start with my friend who has finished in last place in our fantasy football league for 3 consecutive years now. It is my nervous, anxious lawyer friend, scared to protect my First Amendment rights. Welcome, Davie.
Yeah, so it turns out if you never even log on, you don't win many fantasy football games.
Interesting. It's an experiment of sorts that you tried and it didn't work out.
Yeah.
Now we've got a new member to introduce us. We've expanded the society over the last few months, and we've got another new member to introduce to you. Let me introduce, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Alex Evans. He is a writer, a director, a cinematographer, a gaffer and a grip. That's why we call him our below the liner. Alex, how are you, sir?
I'm quite well, thank you.
Are you excited about your first show?
I am. Tremendous honor.
I can feel the excitement burning from here. I feel it so much I'm going to need a drink. Alex doesn't drink, and Davie only drinks, underneath the table when he's not on the show. So I'm going to. I've had this stash here from the last time I was in Astoria. I've got still Christmas beer, but whatever. It's what I got. White Christmas Sam Adams. I'm going to take my sip. All right. Everybody's favorite part of every show is when I take a sip of beer. That's everyone looks forward to, like the inaugural sip of beer. The goal being everyone hopes I get drunk by the end of the show, but it hasn't happened yet. Only Davie's been drunk on the show in episode 9. Speaking of episodes, let me show you our schedule, our 46th series of episodes, starting tonight, of course, Friday the 5th with The Post. In just a few days, Monday, January the 8th, we're going to do our Indie Spotlight, our final Indie Spotlight of our 3rd season. We're going to talk about The Deep Blue Sea. And on Thursday, January 11th, we're back to Thursdays, and we're going to do our classic celebrating its 50th anniversary. We're going to discuss Bonnie and Clyde, film from 1967. And on Monday, January 15th, we'll do our 30th sound-off, which will close out our 3rd complete season. Very exciting next 10 days that we have for you here. Davie, do you really think that we would have finished 3 years of a show?
No.
Okay, that's all I used to say about that, which leads me to January 5th, this day in history. And I just told you what our classic's going to be. On this day, January 5th, historically, in 1930, Bonnie Parker, the real Bonnie Parker, met Clyde Barrow for the first time. And they do not meet like they do in the movie. They met at the house of a gentleman by the name of Clarence Clay. That happened on January 5th, 1930. Thought that was a fun little tidbit to tie everything together. On this day in 1933, the film Cavalcade premieres. It's a film based on a play by Noel Coward. It would go on to win Best Picture. Ladies and gentlemen, we did a review of a movie that was also based on something that Noel Coward wrote. Davie, would you like to remember what show that was?
I'd love to remember.
but you don't?
No.
Does the name David Lean mean anything to you?
No.
Okay, so we did a movie called Brief Encounter, our first classic of the 3rd season, episode 39.3, and that was written by Noel Coward. Do you remember that now, Davie?
I do. It's a great movie.
Okay, there you go. Now, who needs to watch the episode now? He told you. On this day in 1957, kind of a landmark day in baseball, Jackie Robinson retired on this day. He could have moved to Los Angeles with the Dodgers, and he also had the option of being traded to the Giants. Instead, he chose to retire, so he was always a Brooklyn Dodger. And birthdays today, someone who's no longer with us. We usually do a live people, but I thought this is interesting enough because it ties to one of our shows. Jane Wyman would have turned 101 today. She's an Oscar-winning actress for a film that we reviewed. Davie, What film do we review with Jane Wyman?
I have no idea.
One of our most successful shows, I think actually our second most successful show, Johnny Belinda, for episode 29.3. It's the episode where I wear an eye patch famously, and that is one of our most successful shows. She won an Oscar for playing the mute girl in Johnny Belinda. So, of course, Jane Wyman was married to Ronald Reagan during those years, during the 40s, while Ronald Reagan was just an actor. And I had just watched her myself in one of my 1942 films that I got to watch. You may have seen, I put it on Twitter, I think, that I watched Larceny Inc., which co-stars Jane Wyman. So, guys, that's This Day in History. Do you guys have anything to say about any of those little fun items? Alex?
Nope.
Nope. It's funny because that makes you think that Alex is going to be Davie-like, but no, he's going to be very loquacious, just not now. Davie, anything on This Day in History?
No.
I got team players. Hashtag
I've
team
said stuff
players.
about it before.
That's true. I did quiz Davie in the middle of it. Not that he had much to say then. All right, guys, it's time for the summary. In 1973, the New York Times publishes some classified documents that prove that several different administrations lied to the public about the escalation and prospects of the Vietnam War. The Nixon administration bans the further publication of what becomes known as the Pentagon Papers, and the New York Times obeys. When the Washington Post gets a hold of the papers, editor Ben Bradley and owner Kay Graham have to decide if they will knowingly disregard the gag on the press in face of possible jail time in the folding of the world-famous paper, or risk letting the government get away with stifling constitutional rights. Guys, how was that summary?
It's good.
Pretty apt.
Nice. Like it when I nail it. All right, so we're going to do opening thoughts. It's Alex's first show, so we always let Davie teach them how to do opening thoughts. You know, a sentence. Historically, it's come up a couple times in the show. Davie has hated Meryl Streep movies. It's come up several times. Of course, famously, Florence Foster Jenkins, he trashed while the rest of us liked it, and he hated Ricky and the Flash. So her last two movies, Davie has been disgusted by. So we'll see if this is a trend.
Is he more of a Glenn
Davie?
Close fan?
I've never criticized her performance in either movie. They're just terrible movies, and I do regard her as a living actor in the world.
More than Dustin Diamond?
Okay, opening thoughts, Davie.
Opening thought. Yeah, Spielberg still has it, man.
So where does that fit in the Davie scale?
Holy.
Okay, it's that good. Now, Alex, before you give your opening thoughts, I have to scold you because you invited me to a discussion group in which you announced your feelings on this film, and I've since left the discussion group because I'm not supposed to know before the show. So you were a fan.
I was. I would say this was my second favorite film of 2017.
Oh, wow. Alex is not going to be on our top 10 show, so he can spill that. So I think it's a nice bookend to our year because, like the first current feature we did that we started our third season with, called The Promise, The Post gets mired in its own self-righteousness. I did not like this movie. One of the things that I liked about it, however, was I thought there was a lot of good in the screenplay itself. Screenplay, which was finished second on the Blacklist last year. It's kind of interesting how quickly it got made since then. But things that I liked about it, particularly the consolidation of information. And Alex, as a writer, I think you're an expert on this because there's a lot to get across in a way that's easy to digest without while being at least somewhat entertaining. That's a challenge, and the screenplay mostly pulls it off. What do you think, Alex?
I thought it did a really good job staying focused on the characters and their arcs as opposed to just being expositional about what the content of the Pentagon Papers were. That it was focused on their choice to publish as opposed to the content of the conspiracy.
I mostly agree with that. Davie?
Yeah, I think it kind of walked a fine line in that regard, and it did give you enough of the content while keeping a focus on the the legal aspects.
I like the structure, so that's a good thing. I mean, the other thing that I wanted to talk about, and we usually save the T word to the end, but I think it's really relevant in terms of the screenplay conversation. The T word for Alex's benefit is Davie hates it when we talk about themes. The very obvious theme, of course, is freedom of the press. But one of the things that I particularly liked about it is it was about much more than that. And I think the more compelling element to me is the feminist angle and how that played into the film. It almost was even more relevant once the movie was released than since it started, with the hashtag Me Too movement and so forth and so on. And I like how the screenplay managed to incorporate both. The freedom of the press is almost like the on the nose one. The feminism one, I felt like had a little more depth going on. Davey, anything on that?
It balances the two very nicely. I guess that's your main criticism, but I don't think it gets overly preachy. I think it's just kind of on the nose. It was a strong female leader of a company, which wasn't really common back then. Still isn't all that common. And of course, a major court battle in a First Amendment. It's a First Amendment case that all law students have to read. So it's really an important part of our history.
Not denying that, and you're right in terms of what the things that bothered me, but I'm going to rant on that later. Alex, anything on these themes?
Yeah, I thought they really captured the feeling of being the only woman in a room full of men that do not want to consider or hear what you have to say. Like when she would walk into the room and be the only one wearing a color, and it's just kind of this monolithic mass of men in black suits with white hair. I thought it visually communicated that stuff really well without it as being overly on the nose with the dialogue about it.
I completely agree, and that's the part that I felt like it was better handled. Do you want to? Well, no, let's save it. So the other thing, I agree with everything with Davey was saying, and this is where I start to inch towards complaining. Agree with everything Davey's saying about the importance of it, and also perhaps more importantly the relevance of it in today's political environment. I think it's an interesting story, but I also felt like so much of the drama was forced. I felt like everything was sort of stretched to make this decision much more complicated than it was. Like it didn't feel like it ought to be a movie. Like it should be like a court case that law students read, like Davey said. But I don't feel like it was a movie. The climax, the apparent climax, is almost anticlimactic. So they really pushed how many times. They reminded us that how much was on the line, and even from a historical perspective, I think it was so plainly obvious what needed to be done. And every time there was like a back and forth, yes, they published, no, they don't. I mean, that happened a couple times, and I feel like the decision, not LeBron's decision, but Kay Graham's decision, was made several times repeatedly. It was redundant and it interrupted momentum. It's nitpicky stuff, but I mean, we're talking about a Best Picture candidate here. A potential Best Picture candidate anyway. It bothered me. I wasn't feeling it.
I think they really did drag out that choice now that you're saying that. And it seems like she had to reiterate the choice like 3 or 4 times. And Tom Hanks kept going back and forth on whether, like, how he felt about it. Like once his wife was like, hey, things are hard for her because she's a lady too. And he's like, oh, well, if it's lady hard, then maybe I should tell her not to do it. That was the one weak point to me.
Well, I mean, that's a contrivancy of the screenplay and also, quite frankly, the direction, which is, given my feelings towards Spielberg, I hold him to the fire the hardest. But yeah, I mean, because I feel like that is, a team of writers and directors really trying to force the drama, that back and forth. They're trying to make this conflict, raise the stakes in a way that I'm not sure that they as were in real life.
They also portrayed Kay Graham as like a much more nervous Nellie than the woman actually was.
I agree with that. That worked for me, and I'll get to that when we talk about performances. But I'm glad that something I said garnered some agreement. So I'm relieved about that, because I was expecting a war with you guys on this, especially after seeing Alex's Facebook post.
You'll get your war out of me, by the way, because I completely disagree with the word contrivance. And I think that it was a 2-part decision. It was, are we going to publish these documents that are stolen? And then once they find out that the source is the same source, now you are violating a court order. Now it's contempt. Now you're talking about individuals going to jail.
I'm understanding what really happened. What I'm complaining about is, for me, what is the failure of the film to make that emotionally interesting or engaging to me.
It was a huge decision she made. It was hard. All these people around her, and then she have to go through it a second time with the stakes being even higher. Her own personal well-being at stake. I thought it worked very nicely.
Okay, so we have complete disagreement on that point. Anything else in the screenplay before we move on to direction? I mean, I don't want to close that door, but I have some directorial thoughts that I wanted to share with you guys.
Okay.
Spielberg's always been one of my favorite directors. I said that on previous shows. And he's still a master of his craft. his later films have had some tendencies that I'm going to talk about in a second. But the good parts of his direction, I liked the look of the film very much, and this is also a nod to Janusz Kaminski. His cinematographer for the last, 25 years now they've been together. I really like the shot selection. I particularly thought the camera movement injected a lot of energy to a potentially dry story. Some moments that stand out to me is, and this is probably the most successful feminism moment, is when she's coming down the stairs of the courthouse, and the camera sort of cranes with her as she's coming down, and all the women are admiring her as she goes along. The arrival of the shoebox, there's a tracking shot there with Spielberg's daughter actually delivering the shoebox, Sasha, who went to school, the same school as my ex-girlfriend. And the lighting of the interiors, and maybe Alex will talk about this too. I mean, I always say on the show that movies with big vistas often win cinematography Oscars, but really it's the more difficult lighting is when you have interiors and really well-lit interiors. And what I liked about it is I think it was a sort of beauty without calling too much attention to itself. Anything on the cinematography, Alex?
Yeah, I thought they captured the look of the 70s really well without falling into a trap a lot of cinematographers and designers run into, where people's instinct a lot of times is to make it look like an exploitation film, and that's not what Spielberg and Kaminski did on this, which I think was the right choice. I also thought like they would do tracking shots, like when he first arrives at leaked documents to make copies at like the movie studio or production office or whatever at the beginning, when they were necessary, but they didn't get caught up in trying to be stylistic just for the sake of it. For the most part, they were just telling the story.
I completely agree with that. I have to move on, David, but anything quick on the look of the film, cinematography?
You know, it's funny because it's a double-edged sword for me, because there were a couple of shots that I felt were great, where there were kind of long shots where you would see protesters and people people outside, and the shot would go on for a while. But it's also one of my quibbles, because I think my only real complaint about this film is I think some of those extras were pretty terrible, and I picked up on how bad they were.
That's really nitpicky. That's a level of granularity that we don't normally get at Davie. That's
Yeah.
So would you say that's a failure on the part of the first AD?
Yeah.
Should they have...
Oh no! Don't start that. And it's extras casting person is that responsible there.
I think that they're probably not extras. They're like a step above the extras, like the ones that are actually speaking. Look, I'm stretching for a complaint because I can't be all positive.
Nor should you.
Yeah, some of them didn't work for me.
Part of that, I think, is it's the director's responsibility to certainly communicate to the first AD, like, hey, these guys are bumping. And for the layman audience, when I say bumping, like things just aren't working for me. This moment or thing element does not feel right. That's what I mean by bumping. So let me get to my chief complaint, and I'm gonna put Spielberg put his feet to the fire on this, because I think it's a common issue in his later films, and I talked about it a little bit in Bridge of Spies, and that's the heavy-handedness. And it's something that Clint Eastwood has done a lot recently, and I feel like more and more Spielberg has as well. And I feel like even some of his great films that we almost consider masterpieces, Schindler's List, Saving Private Ryan, Munich, they have moments of that, whereas I feel like this and Bridge of Spies has a lot of that. And there's a fine line between something that's impactful and something that's trite and preachy. And the moments that stepped over the line for me is in the beginning that Alex was talking about, the use of the audio voiceover montage of papers, of excerpts of the papers. The use of the Nixon phone calls was, I think, unnecessary and heavy-handed. Forcing, a great actress, Carrie Coon, whom I love. I talked about her in our very first episode. She's my best supporting actress of 2014. She was forced to read the ruling over the phone in a very awkward scene that I felt like diffused some of the power of it. And anytime a character lectured, they had these weird pauses as if waiting for the audience to applaud, the theater audience. And it slowed the film down in those moments, interrupting the momentum once again. All these things are a master director blinded by his anger at the current political climate. And hey, I'm angry at the current political climate too. I get so frustrated at movies that I agree with. I agree with the politics of it, and yet the director, and this was true in The Promise as well, gets so wrapped up in it, they lose sight of storytelling. And he's the best, but not so much here. And the result is something less impactful than, for example, the emotionally engaging Spotlight, which Davie and I both had in our top 10s 2 years ago.
The telephone thing, I didn't have a problem with that. But I did think when I saw it that you weren't going to like it.
I love it when he predicts things that I don't like.
I definitely think there was a lot of stylized acting and pausing, and it was. I mean, this is a really cinematic film, and I think that the analogy to Spotlight is one that I had in my mind, because it's I think two films on completely different ends of the spectrum, and I think they both work very well, but there could not be for movies that are the same setting, essentially, they could not be any different.
John Slattery in Spotlight plays the son of Tom Hanks.
As much as I love Tom Hanks's performance in this, I think that there are going to be people that hate it.
Don't jump the gun on me. We're talking about heavy-handedness here.
Well, I think that they're hand in hand.
I'm going to come to that because that's the very next thing.
But it works for me. This is a point that I make almost every episode. When there's a performance like that, it's all going to be about whether you enjoyed it.
And I was careful to say there's a fine line.
Yeah.
That line's going to be different for everybody. It's a fine line between impactful and trite/preachy was my exact quote. People are going to be on either side of that line. And as someone behind the camera, I'm curious to see what Alex says about this too, who's also behind the camera. I'm particularly sensitive to that. As much as a point I want to make, I try not to spell it out as clearly as this movie tends to. And I'm particularly sensitive when it comes to Spielberg because I'm aware that he keeps doing it in his most recent films. And, the end of Schindler's List is sort of criticized, the bookends of Saving Private Ryan. So you knew that potential was there. And more and more as he gets older, he becomes more Stanley Kramer and less the young renegade that we know. And I guess that was an opaque reference for people, but
the shot that Bridge of Spies I thought was a little over the line was with the kids jumping over the fence.
Absolutely, 100%.
There was nothing like that in this film. No.
I listed what I consider the 5 or 6 most egregious examples of something that was trite. Alex, how far off base am I?
No, I see what you're saying, and I think it's a problem it's especially apparent in the work of prolific directors like Spielberg and Clint Eastwood, who you mentioned, where as they get older and a lot of other filmmakers from their generation are retiring and they're continuing, they have a harder and harder time identifying with the audience. These people aren't getting it. I just need to hammer it home to them.
They're in a place where no one's going to argue with them. They're in the Tarantino, Apatow place where there's no reins on them. And that never was a problem for Spielberg, but I think, with politics becoming more and more at the fore, and as they get older, politics become more important. He didn't care that much when he was making Jaws,
Yeah, I mean, this film felt more nuanced than War Horse, and I loved War Horse, but the cheese factor was pretty high in it.
That's interesting. I loved War Horse too, but it felt like a 40s film. That's one of the things I loved about War Horse. The other thing I liked about War Horse, not to get too off topic, is I liked how picaresque it seemed. Not picturesque, picaresque. It's sort of like the episodic nature of it. It almost felt like it had like a Tom Sawyer or Huck Finn quality to it.
I do agree that the phone call, I think they could have found a better way to do that.
Yeah. So yeah, Tom Hanks. I have been a big proponent of Tom Hanks over the years. I talked a lot about how amazing he is in Forrest Gump in episode 34.3. We did that show. And even as recently as 2013, he gave an Oscar-worthy performance, what I call the best performance of that year, in Captain Phillips. He was outstanding. And we've got another terrific Tom Hanks performance in a Steven Spielberg film, incidentally, coming up in a 2018 classic. But here, I feel like he's just growling, like Christian Bale in Batman growling. He doesn't get any of the depth or nuance that Jason Robards brought to the role in 1976. And I feel like he's almost just a two-dimensional stand-in for liberal America. Part of that is an issue with the screenplay. Again, I feel like the feminism element was much more interesting to me. Meryl Streep has all the film's best moments. I don't remember which of you complained about her being a little nervous Nancy. I looked at her bringing Kay's vulnerability and awkwardness and fear to life. It's her story, it's her journey, and navigated beautifully by the very best ever to live, as Davie said. So that's how I feel about the two lead performances. Davie's talked a little bit about it. So Alex, what do you think?
I thought Meryl Streep's performance was a bit over the top, and I had trouble buying it.
So the opposite.
And I liked Tom Hanks, and most of my criticisms towards his role, like you said, I think it has to do with the scripting as opposed to his performance and interpretation of it. Like, there's not a lot of arc for him.
No thoughts about the growling?
I like that it was a departure from the typical likable guy he plays.
Davie's in agreement. Davie, what about Meryl?
Oh my God, I loved it. I loved everything about what she did. I think that she kind of had this you could see the fear in her eyes, and then you could see her gather herself up and make these decisions, and I could just see the toll it was taking on her. I thought it was a fantastic performance.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with that. Now, I just want to acknowledge the supporting performance very quickly because everybody in the world is in this movie. Some standouts on the plus side are one of my favorites, who I've been trying to work with in the last couple of years, Michael Stuhlbarg, who's in a lot of movies this year. You know, and in a very small role, but he's always a standout to me. Tracy Letts, who was in my #1 movie of last year. Christine, he played Fritz in this. Bruce Greenwood is Robert McNamara. And I don't normally like Bruce Greenwood. He's a little hammy for me sometimes, but I thought he was really good here. On the flip side, though, the weak links, and granted thankless roles, Bradley Whitford, poorly written role, and he can't do much with it. And sadly, Davey, my best actor from last year, Jesse Plemons, I was so excited to see him. He was delivering your language, the legal language, but I feel like he struggled, and it's another two-dimensional character, but he couldn't bring life to it. He couldn't breathe life into that one at all. Anything about those supporting performances?
No love for Bob Odenkirk? I thought he was great.
I was sort of in the middle on him. Like, there's so many people. I just sort of like picked out some people I thought particularly good.
I like seeing him and David Cross team up.
David Cross, I thought was good too. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was fun to see them, but weird. I was like, I'm a little distracted by this. It's cool, but
it's like when John C. Reilly shows up in Gangs of New York.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. I'm like, is this the time for this, guys? Davey, what about the supporting performances?
Jesse Plemons is awesome, and you don't understand he nailed it. Like, that's the guy. Like, I know that guy. I've seen him.
Is that guy you? Is he playing you? Did he base that on you?
With him, yeah, that he was perfect.
Well, maybe we'll try and get him to be on take your place on the next on the top 10.
No, you're the one who was critical. He'll take your place. He'll.
You might need to. Because that's the thing about this movie is I usually do my first pass at a top 10 on January 1st, and obviously I've got like 30 more movies to see. But this, as much as I've disliked this movie, this actually was in at number 10. And then I started working on the script for this, and I'm like, no, I really actually didn't like this. I'm going to take this out.
The lawyers were a weak point for me, and I thought it was just kind of this lazy casting director being like, oh, this guy's on Veep. We should put him on here.
I felt that too. Like
an awkward guy. Let's just get the Veep guy.
I mean, like, and I had an overall thought. I mean, like, do we need too many names in this movie? Like, it was good to see Carrie Coon and Jesse Mueller. I think those were right. Alison Brie, though, I want Jesse Plemons in bigger roles. Same thing with Michael Stuhlbarg. You know, like it felt distracting, like a parade of great character actors that I love that were all in this movie in small parts with not much to do. All probably because they all care about the cause.
I get to be in a movie directed by Spielberg with Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep. Please, please, please put me in it.
And I'll take anything that you have. Absolutely. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap things up. Anything you guys want to say about the post?
I liked the last two Spielberg movies, but I did not love them. And this one I loved.
What's the other one that I'm forgetting?
BFG.
Oh, you know, I like that too. I like that more than this. I like BFG more than I thought I would. But yeah. Alex, anything you want to say before we close out?
Well, as a Washingtonian, I appreciated this movie a lot and thought it captured the point of view of people in Washington who are not in the government, which is a point of view that I think is often left out when we portray our government or our citizenry. And I grew up reading the Post every day, so it made me happy to see it, and I thought it was well acted and well directed.
Okay, I had some issues. And now, Davey, this is our last current feature, obviously, of our third season. So we don't know, I don't have got a new one to announce or anything, because we don't know when we're going to start our fourth season. It'll be late March, early April. But it's possible, and I floated this to Davey, but he ignored this email. It's possible we can go Spielberg to Spielberg, like if we want to get aggressive and try and do Ready Player One at the end of March.
It's not that I ignored the email. I just probably haven't finished it yet.
For those of you who don't know, that is an attack at my typically lengthy emails.
I've never had to bookmark an email.
And you're complaining about other people's writing?
Ready Player One?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, we're going to try and do Ready Player One. We're just discussing this now, so we'll see. The finales come out at the beginning of March, and we need a break. I worked over 1,000 hours on this show in 2017, so I feel like I need some time off, but we'll see how it goes. But our next show is this Monday, January 8th. This was our final current feature, and that's going to be our final indie spotlight. And throughout the year of 2017, and this is still, even though it's 2018, it's still part of our 2017 season, we do indies from 5 years ago, so it'll be our last indie from 2012, and we're going to do film starring Rachel Weisz called The Deep Blue Sea. That's going to be this Monday, January 8th. All right, guys, say goodnight to the audience.
Auf Wiedersehen, good night.
Good night, audience. Subscribe to the channel, please.
He makes you feel so bad. He's like my mother with the guilt. With that, this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.